Hello, sparklers. Oh, welcome back to another episode of Ignite Your Spark. I'm your host, Kim Duff Selby, and I am thrilled that you have tuned in on whatever device you happen to be listening or watching on, because this is on YouTube. And you know, it's really fun to listen, but it's also really fun to watch my guests, especially the gorgeous, sparkling, charming guest I have today, Des Caminos. Des is an embodiment life coach and somatic practitioner who works with empathetic women. And catch this, she helps them silence their inner critic. Not that anybody listening could relate, and helps us break away from the mindset of not enough, because even if you had wonderful parents, somehow throughout your life you learned you were not enough, so that you can live with more clarity, fulfillment, and freedom, and dare I say, spark. Welcome, Des. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kim. What a beautiful introduction. And I'm so excited to be here, sparkle and all.
I know, and you are looking very sparkly and lovely, of course. Before I begin, I need to know, how do you ignite your spark?
Ooh, I ignite my spark with tofu. And what I mean by that is, everyone thinks about FOMO, like the fear of missing out. And one thing that really gets me to ignite my spark and keep it flaming hot is to tofu, to trust a filling up. So that's what I do. I need some time to ground and to be in my own little Des container. So that's what keeps this spark going, just the trust filling up.
I mean, the minute you said it, I figured it was an acronym because I'm like a chicken lover. But then my mind started going to tofu and going, I do love tofu. Yeah, our minds go everywhere. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should make that tonight. This is all while you're talking. My mind, everybody says they have 60,000 thoughts a day or minute. I don't know. I have like 90 or 100 because they just go back and forth. Not that I wasn't listening, but you said tofu. What could I do?
Oh, I know. And I think that's a little bit of the trick. I wanted it to be delicious for you.
And I love how you use that word. I had the honor of being interviewed on Des's Facebook page. She has a private Facebook group called Wise Women, Just Wise Women.
Yeah, it's called
Women
Women
Wisdom.
of Wisdom. Yeah.
Women of Wisdom. And we had a really fun conversation. And I love how you use the word delicious, because that conjures up something that we don't usually think of when we're speaking of something other than food. And yet when you say that, it just feeds my soul. And
Mm.
yes, I use that word intentionally. So it's really cool. For those who do not know, what is a somatic practitioner?
Ooh, great question. So, somatics is really anything that deals with the body. And so when we're talking about these somatic workings, it's really about that mind-body connection. Now, what makes me a little different than like the people you might see on Instagram talking about hip stretches and pelvic release is what I really like to do is I love supporting people on really dropping out of the analytical mind and tuning into the wisdom of their body. So
Mm.
what my somatic practice looks like is really learning like, hey, did you know that our pancreas stores stress regarded to feeling like we have control in our life? So it's really learning how to understand the guide map of our body and the wisdom of our emotions that lies in our tissues.
That is interesting, because if anybody's a yoga practitioner, you often hear the yoga teachers say how many emotions are stored in your hips and how we release that. Do you help people release those emotions? I know you help them become aware.
Yeah.
How would someone go about releasing those emotions?
So there's so many different ways, and thank you for asking because I love offering the world tactile tips because awareness is a beautiful thing, but without action, it's going to leave many of us feeling stuck, resentful, and just information constipation. And so one way to really start releasing some of your emotions or the tension that comes with that is to talk to them, to really open up dialogue with your emotions. I mean, think about how different it would feel if when anger started showing up, instead of trying to suppress it or hide it away, we just allowed it to speak. We allowed it to be in flow. And that's a really big thing that I love to advocate for, is just opening up dialogue to release that tension and stay in flow and in your sovereignty.
That is a really good tip. And it's challenging for some people. They might say, well, that's a little crazy. I'm going to be talking to my lungs and I'm going to be talking. But I have heard this. I interviewed a very well known doctor, Master Dr. Shah, who does healing through calligraphy. And
Mm.
what he has mantras, and you say things, you talk to your body parts and say, I know you have the ability to heal yourself. It's not crazy.
Yeah. And we talk to ourselves all day. I mean, how many times do we tell ourselves, like, oh, I should have done that? Oh man, I'm late to the thing. We constantly have this inner dialogue that we have going on. But it's not crazy when we're being self-deprecating and going in shame spirals. Like, that's normal. And I love this idea of, like, yeah, it is a little quirky. It's a little unconventional, because for so many of us, conventional isn't working and it hasn't worked. We need something that's a little out of the box, because we know that one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, that makes such perfect sense. And I think that more and more people are realizing that our minds go to negativity bias much more than the positive. So you hear so many times thoughts are things, and that what you dwell on, what you focus on is reality. Why not focus on, hey there, pancreas, how you doing today? You all good? Of course, every morning I say, thank you for my strong, white, thick hair, thinking that maybe it's going to start growing very thick. I'm talking to you. You know that I love you no matter what. I mean, we want to talk to ourselves and our body parts like we talk to our best friend, right?
Yeah, and it can be hard, because we don't live in a world where we're taught how to talk to ourselves. We live in a world of second guessing, of what ifs, should haves, maybes, next time. So the idea of really being able to do something that we've never been taught feels wild. Maybe we've seen Japanese on a movie, but doesn't mean that we can speak it. And it's, I think, the same thing when it comes to our self-expression and inner dialogue. We can have this idea, but no one's really taught us how to do it. So it makes it really difficult for us to start.
And there are people such as yourself, although you do it in such an eloquent, lovely manner that no one is like you. And this is such a great segue into what I wanted to at least ask you about and speak about, because on your Facebook group, I just love it. People can find it because Women of Wisdom. Des does these lovely little videos, and she does interviews. And she did one on self sabotage. And I want to dig into self sabotage because we do it. And you had me, your 6-minute video, and I was laughing because you're just so clever. And let's talk about self sabotage and why, how, where, when, all the good stuff.
Mm. Well, for anyone who's listening, just take a big breath if you have ever gone through self-sabotage, and know that you're not alone, because, you know, self-sabotage shows up in so many different ways, whether it is avoidance, whether it is people pleasing, whether it is, for me, my self-sabotage was, I was addicted to overachieving. And so I thought the more that I could take on, the more that I did, then the more, loved, successful, worthy I would be. But at the same time, I realized, for my pattern of self-sabotage, having a full plate meant that I couldn't, if I didn't do something great, it's because I had this thing to fall back on. And I think we're so aware of these big levels of how self-sabotage shows up. But I think there's this little underlying piece that I think could be really powerful for people to know. And it is the connection between self-sabotage and should. Like, just the word should, and what happens to us when we should our pants.
Such a big moment to laugh out loud. Should people free? If you didn't hear that, she said, "Yeah, we should our pants." Okay,
Yeah.
just clarify.
And it's okay, and just think about, how often are you shoulding yourself every day? Is it, I should have woken up earlier? I should have ordered the coffee instead of the tea. And I think that that language of should has become so normalized in our lives that we don't really realize how, when we step into that space of expression, we're bringing up self-doubt, we're second guessing ourselves, we're looking at the things that we've done from that lens of comparative, of not enoughness, of judgment. And oftentimes it comes with like a really heavy blanket of guilt and shame of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I'm so fill in the blanks. And that buffet of self-doubt, of unworthiness, man, self-sabotage will eat that right up.
Mm. Yeah, and everybody does that. Why did we learn that? How did we learn to do that? Because obviously it comes as kids. And I guess it's because, as you said, it's kind of we're trying to protect ourselves. We wear that mantle of, well, I should have done that, but I didn't. So it's okay because I'm blank or I'm not. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah, and I think it gives us a little bit of control too, when we feel like, oh, this didn't go the way that I wanted it to go or I expected it to go. And there were all these controlling factors. But if I say that it was my fault, if I take that responsibility, I take the accountability, then I've got some more control in maybe being able to change it, the course of direction next time. And I think it's a beautiful little coping mechanism that maybe we have created of trying to grab that control back. But I think the bigger thing is we don't allow ourselves to move past that accountability. We don't get to say, hey, actually, I snoozed my alarm 10 times because I woke up with anxious or restless thoughts. When we're just in the place of should, it's like we're just walking into this invisible wall and we don't have any direction of how we can take empowered action. But when we can validate ourselves and say, hey, I know that I slept in because X, Y, and Z. Now I know what I can do in the future. We get to stay in our empowerment. We get to stay in our control, and I think when we're just in that space of should, we end up just falling into old patterns and feeling stuck.
So the first thing that someone can do to realize that they are in self-sabotage is think where they say, "Oh, I should have done XYZ."
Yeah. And whenever you catch yourself saying, I should have done this, just ask yourself, why didn't you? Why didn't you wake up earlier? Why didn't you ask for that promotion? Why didn't you blank? Because once you understand your why, then you're validating yourself, and validation allows you to feel seen and heard. And I know everyone in the world deserves way more validation than they're getting. And so validate yourself, because that's going to be the beautiful tool to build the muscle of self-worth and to stop shooting yourself.
You know, sorry.
Like,
I love it so much, so much. It's interesting because you hear about find your why. I mean, when I was in sort of more of the business type world, it's always find your why because I've been in a lot of salesy kind of things. Find your why. Is it for your kids? Why do you want this? Why do you want that? But I've not heard it in reference to uncovering when you say, oh, I should be doing that. And then looking at reframing it to why should I do that? And
yeah.
maybe it's something that we shouldn't do. So what if you don't wake up, half an hour earlier? So is that really that big a deal?
And I think the more that we're able to connect to our why, the more that we're validating that part of ourselves that made that decision. For example, I feel like I should have called my brother the other day. And then I find myself like in that space of, oh, I'm so bad with time. I'm so irresponsible. But then when I ask myself, well, why didn't I? Why didn't I call my brother? It's like, oh, because I was out hiking and I decided to have lunch there and it took a little bit longer than I wanted to. And then I get to say, wow, okay. So instead of beating myself up with that nasty inner critic, I get to say, hey, this is why I didn't do that thing, because I chose to have this experience. And now I know in the future to be more mindful if I want to.
That's right. That's really, really great advice. And it's it wasn't as if you were doing something bad,
Yeah.
but you have to kind of let it go. We beat ourselves up so often queen of beating myself up. I'm also
Mhm.
queen of thinking I'm fabulous too, because I tell people when I've coached them and work with them in workshops, give yourself a big hug every day because
Yeah.
you deserve it. And maybe someone else isn't there to give you one.
I love to tell my clients to just smack their butt. Just like, and I know that sounds weird, but like there's no way that you can't give yourself a little like smack on your bottom and can't help but feel like, woo, reinvigorated. Like it's,
That's the difference in our ages. I give myself a hug and Des gives herself a pat on the butt.
yeah, because like again, for me, like in the somatic space, I love the self-soothing that can come from a hug, but sometimes we're like, the brain is going so fast that the idea of being slow and intimate, it's like, Kim, I can't do that. I have 1,000 things to do in 20 seconds right now. So just that smack somehow is like, whew, wait, it's like putting fresh water on your face. It kind of wakes you back up.
That'll ignite your spark.
Yeah, right.
Get that spark going. Take the lighter and hit your butt. Oh, goodness. Oh, the wisdom you learn on this podcast, right? Oh. Des, how did you get into somatic work? What was it that brought you to this? Were you doing your own healing?
Yeah. I have 2 degrees, and while I was continuing to get my master's in psychology, and I have a degree as well in sociology, I just felt like there was something missing. I felt like they were bringing people to the space of hyper awareness, and it just, for whatever reason, I didn't feel like the institution had space for the vision that I was bringing. So I hung up my psychology shoes, and then cut to a few years later, I just had my own breakthrough, breakdown, awakening, whatever it is you want to call it. And I realized that so much of what I was doing was in my head. And it felt like I was trying to fight the mind with the mind. And
Mm.
I just felt like I was playing a game of tug of war, except I was the rope. And so I've always loved dance. And so I started teaching burlesque. And the intention being to really empower women to take off the layers of societal expectation. I went on and got certified as a dance movement therapist. And I just really started seeing the power that came from the body. And as I leaned more into that space in my own journey of unconventional approaches, that's really how the somatic piece came and the embodiment. Because I realized we all deserve more of an interconnected approach that's not just one or the other.
Mm. I really love that. And that's my go-to word. I love that. I know that's my filler word, but I truly mean that because with burlesque, you hear, "Ah," people go get all. Yeah, but it's the same as any form of dance. It's freedom. Now, it's not the same as ballet, which I was trained in, because that's very classical ballet, and you are often not allowed to truly express
Ah,
yourself and go into the music because it's more rigid, although I think it's one of the most beautiful art forms in the world. And I think it's why I gravitated towards Broadway and more sort of freestyle because I like to groove and move. And I
yeah.
would love to have taken burlesque. I mean, it's not too late. It's just, I don't know if there's one around here that I will be taking from. But you and I are very in sync in that we love unleashing things through the body. And I know that you have also studied a lot of improv, as have I. And I can see how that helps in working with women. Have you created your own form of therapy through improv?
Yes. And it's something that, y- like you're saying, there's just so much power. One, in being able to just, I think, create psychological distance. And I think when we're thinking about our healing journey, sometimes so many of us are like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to read books. I'm going to have to do all this inner work. And it sounds a little overwhelming and not so, it doesn't rev the engine.
Right.
And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring in a sense of play, and not just play therapy, but really how could we start to leverage and use improv games to create psychological distance from our big emotions like shame, guilt, from our experiences of self-sabotage, of people pleasing. How can we really create that psychological distance while we start to unmask what patterns are ours and aren't ours? And if we're doing it through play and fun and games, it becomes so much easier and the transformation happens so much faster. Like, for example, one thing that I love to do is just think about like your anxiety. If you had to cast your anxiety as a celebrity, who would you cast? Who would play your anxiety in that movie?
Yeah.
And I think it's those fun, playful questions and then allowing ourselves to act and move through those energies it's just really powerful.
It is. And it's a lot of it is inner work. And I know that for myself, until about, oh, I don't even know how many years ago, I I really tried to just tamp everything down. It's all good. It's all good. It's all good. And I did not like to focus on what was wrong or what wasn't working. I just was one of those barrel through. And I think when you go through a workshop or you work with a coach or you start to sort of peel away the layers, you are given more permission to look inside. But for me, it really took working with someone, working with others in order to access that. Because for me, things like improv and dance come so naturally, come so easily because it's pretending, it's playing. And a lot of people pretend and play even if they don't feel good doing it on stage, and they don't tend to look inside to sort of chip away at the pieces of us that aren't so great.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one thing that really drew me to this interconnected kind of approach to everything is because I'm there, in the shadows. I love being like, okay, let's dive into these bigger emotions that we really haven't been taught to process, like guilt, shame, you know, grief, rage, resentment. Especially I think as women, we have this fear, or these old stories of being too much or too big or too blank. And so I wanted to make it easy and fun to look at those parts of ourselves that normally we kind of look away from, because I know that it's in that space of really being able to open dialogue and see the parts of ourselves and the wisdom that comes with it. That's when we can really come home to self. And like anger, anger's got so much flack, but anger shows up in the body for two reasons. Either a boundary is being violated or you're feeling unseen or unheard. And just imagine how different our life could be with our emotions, those heavier ones, if we knew the message, if we could play with them instead of like fight, flight, or freeze.
Mm, that's really enlightening to me, the part about anger. I think everyone is aware of grief and grief therapy. Not that they do it. I mean, I was 22 and I lost my dad. I didn't grieve really properly. I think those things live in your body for so long. But figuring out why you're so angry, what are you repressing? What is it? And I was reflecting back on when I've been angry, and sure enough, it's because I didn't feel good about myself at that moment, or jealousy comes through. Jealousy. My dad used to say, jealousy and envy, they're not emotions that are natural to us. We shouldn't have those emotions. Everybody is equal. And yet we do because we're humans here. And that's one of the emotions we have to learn to cope with. But the anger piece, you see people, and that's sort of makes me think about road rage and the people who get so upset. It is interesting. The whole thing is interesting how we have to dig deep inside of ourselves to really unleash ourselves so that we can reach a growth potential, reach the person that we hope that we can be. And there's no reason we can't be.
Exactly. And I think that's where beautiful power lies, talking about the road rage and these things. How can we really unmask our emotions? Because you're right, like these feelings like jealousy, anger, we have our authentic understanding of these emotions, but because we don't really live in a world where we're taught to feel safe in expressing them or processing them, we're taught like anger should look like this and grief should look like that. And jealousy shows up when these things are happening. So these emotions, they just like over time, they just put different masks on. So that way they can be digestible in society. But what happens when we take those masks off, like you're saying, in that space of inner work? What treasures lie in that void?
Yeah, there are so many treasures to be found. And, it's just part of the life experience, all of this kind of crap that we wear, that we go through. It's a matter of how we process it and how we go through it. And I think the whole somatic experience and learning about that is a really valuable tool that you offer, that you are trained in to help in, I want to say, a gentle way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just kind of, that all came together. You're talking about the interconnected, and I know your website is the interconnected self. It's like, well, duh. But then I wasn't really thinking about it before. How do you work with people, with women? And I know it's women, and I love that you focus specifically on women because so many of us have been told we're too much, et cetera. And hopefully it's getting better, but it's not. Look at politics. You still see men in charge because we have always often felt we're not good enough. And if we have, then why aren't we succeeding at X, Y, and Z? And I do think it's important that you chose to focus on women. So, how does one work with you?
Yeah. And so I'm taking a breath because I'm like all excited because there's so many different things that are happening. And for women to work with me, I really am doing group coaching. And the reason is because I have found that so many of our wounds have happened in relation to other people. So the more that we can be witnessed as we heal those wounds in relation to other people, the faster that transformation happens.
Mm.
And there's something that's so powerful being in an accountability group with other women. You hear someone's story and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm not crazy. I'm not broken. It's a really powerful experience to go through. So that's really what I advocate for is my group coaching program. And it's also more fun to play with people.
Yeah.
And that being said, there are some women who are looking for some more deeper work. And so I do one-on-ones as well for women, and I do support some teen girls as well. So, because I know that my whole goal in doing the work that I do is I just want to live in a world where humans, and especially women, feel so safe in their own minds. And they have such a deep level of inner trust that they don't abandon themselves to their jobs, to their families, to their big emotions, or to their fears. And so I know that in those group spaces and working with teen girls too, that that's really where the magic is going to happen.
I agree. There's nothing like the energy of being in a group. And it is not for everyone because some people do not care to share. And groups can be tricky because there's always that one person who talks more than anybody else.
Yeah.
And I've been that person, but I have learned to not be that person and to really, when you sit and listen to someone else's story and really listen, think about how much you can help someone else by hearing their story and help yourself. And I want to applaud you for working with teen girls because they need it so much. When I think about my 17-year-old self, and I really would love to talk to teenagers and tell them, not tell them, because you can't tell a teenage girl anything, but encourage them not to give their power away, because I gave mine away to a boy at the age of 17. And it was very traumatic in terms of coloring every single relationship I had for many, many decades. So that is powerful. And I think that you have a really wonderful approach, and you're young enough that they won't think you are way, oh, you're too old. What does she know? I think that's a valuable space, really valuable.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely think I'm like at the sweet spot age, and I'm like not quite tall either. I'm like probably 5 foot on a good day. And so I feel like they see me as like not intimidating or threatening. My purse is a fluffy owl. So I think I come in with like, is she even really an adult? And I do think that that gives me some brownie points because I talk about how do we build self-worth outside of social media, and you're 15. And I was like, it's hard for us women to do it, and so I'm just really grateful that I'm so received in that teenage space, because I'll be honest, the first time I walked into a teen support group, I was a little terrified. I was like, there's like 10, 15-year-old girls and they're all really tall. And I just felt my own teenage wounds come up.
Uh,
So,
well, we teach what we need to heal within ourselves too.
mhm. Right. And that's why we're the best teachers, because we know what it's like to go through that fun little spiral of giving away our pain and the journey of coming back to it. And so it's so nice to be able to say, hey, I'm not just someone who went to college or did this thing and got this paper. I'm someone who's been on this path with you. I've been there on the ground. I've been there with panic attacks, depression, low self-worth. Girl, you name it, Kim. Whew,
Yeah.
there's a lot of fire in the spark.
That I love that. There's a lot of fire in the spark. Des, you are just such an eloquent, beautiful, lovely soul. I thank you so much for your time today. And people should reach you through the interconnectedself.com. And I know you're active on TikTok and Instagram
Mm.
under your
Yeah,
name.
under my name, under Des Caminos.
I'll put the links down below, but some people like to hear it, as I say every week. So
Yeah.
I like to have it put out in the universe, because you never know who's picking it up. Right.
Yeah, and you know what? And also thank you for being so abundant in the way that people can access this, for the visual learners, for the audio, like, you're there in so many different spaces. And so thank you for thinking of everyone.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Des,
Yes.
it has been my delight to have you on Ignite Your Spark. And you have truly just ignited something within me when I hit myself on the butt to reignite that spark.
Because you deserve it, Kim.
So many good nuggets, tofu, and a little butt slap. Okay. And if someone just listened to the last 6 seconds of this, that's what you get. And you have to go back and listen to the whole thing. Yes, you are a light in the world. And I thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you to this amazing Sparkful community. I know that everyone here is just so delicious in their own way.
Delicious. Oh, sparklers, thank you so much for tuning in. If you loved this episode, which how could you not? And I would so appreciate a 5-star rating. Like, if you're going to give that to your Uber driver, give it to me, because we want to express more light into the world. I really feel that that is my journey, is to shine a light on those who are shining a light in the world and bringing out the light in others. So please, I hope this has inspired you to ignite something within yourself. Share this episode, comment, like, let's get the light out into the world. And I hope you have a beautiful day, night, whenever you are listening to this. Thank you again for tuning in, and shine on.